With this Senate update, I'm Julie Barkey. The 2015 legislative session ended with an almost foregone conclusion that there would be a special session. Within days of its conclusion, Governor Dayton vetoed 3 budget bills, including the education bill. Now, after a few weeks of renewed negotiations and diving into logistical challenges that are presented by a closed-down Capitol building, the House and Senate are just about ready to begin a special session. We caught up with Senate leadership for their perspectives on what to expect. Since the end of the regular session through this point, how has preparing for this special legislative session been different compared with other years? This room obviously being one of the more obvious.
Well, this is going to be a historic session of the state Senate. We've had every floor session of the state Senate in the state capitol since 1905. So this will be the first time. And if you can kind of look around the room, it's kind of a makeshift operation we're going to have. We have no voting board. People are going to have to vote orally, like they did probably back in the early days of statehood. And that's going to be a bit cumbersome. Normally when we vote, there's a voting board and people can kind of count how many votes there are. We're not going to know unless you're personally keeping a little numeric tab in your chair. So members aren't going to have microphones on their desks like we historically have had. They're going to have to come down out of their seating area to a microphone if they'd like to speak on a bill or offer any amendments. So it's going to be much different, but quite historic.
Let's talk about the actual day. What do you anticipate in terms of fluidity and trying to get these bills passed? Do you anticipate a lot of recesses or just one quick session?
Well, it will depend on how fastly the House can act. Some of the bills will be Senate files, some will be House files. The Senate can't act on House files till they send them over to us. So I expect we'll try to act on them simultaneously. We'll pass the Senate files, they'll pass the House files, but it will take them longer to get the bills passed because they have twice as many members that are likely going to want to have some debate, potentially amendments on them. So I expect the Senate to act a little more quickly, which is normal just because our size is half. So it could be that the Senate at some point has to recess just to wait for the House to send us some work. I'm just a little unsure how the flow of the debate is going to go yet.
Senator, at the time that we're talking with you, the global an agreement in theory has been reached. However, there have been some issues that have sprung up, particularly with the auditor, that concern, and a few others. Are you surprised that some of these things came into play so late into this process?
Well, the more you leave this whole thing open, the more members start to have ideas about provisions that they want to revisit, the more special interest groups that work the Capitol think, hey, there's just one last chance to get my little provision included, even though it maybe wasn't, or maybe some special interest group has a provision that was passed that now they'd like to get taken out. And the auditor provision is kind of an example of that. That's been passed and the governor signed into law, and there's people now trying to remove that. That was actually a request by the Association of Minnesota Counties. There's been a lot of misunderstanding about that. There are 28 or 30 counties that already have this authority to be able to go out and contract for private auditing services. And the other counties in the Association of Minnesota Counties are saying, well, listen, if 30 counties can do this, why can't the rest of us do it? It's been an issue that's been around for a long time, and I just want people to know it's not partisan driven at all. I'm not trying to defend the Republicans, but the fact of life is it's coming from the Association of Minnesota Counties.
Finally, what do you want to say to Minnesotans who ask the question, how is it we got to this position where a special session is needed, given there was a budget surplus to begin with?
Well, this year we got into this situation. It was a very difficult negotiations between a Democratic Senate and a Republican House. The last time that Minnesota's been lined up like this was in 1985, where we had a Democratic Senate, a Democratic governor, a Republican House. And that time what happened is they actually didn't get the budget passed. And they ended up having, by adjournment date, they ended up having to sit down and negotiate out a budget. Rudy Perpich then called them back into special session in mid-June. This year, we were actually able, the Democratic House or the Democratic Senate and the Republican House, were actually able to negotiate a budget, and the 8 budget bills actually passed. But the governor didn't feel the bills were satisfactory, so he vetoed 3 of the 8 budget bills. So a little different dynamic, but to the public, it probably looks the same in that it's going to require a special session, just like the 1985 session did.
Did you anticipate this when session began?
Well, there's some, I would describe them kind of as some missed opportunities. Sometimes the best negotiations are those where everyone kind of walks away from the table grumbling. And I think that's probably what the outcome's going to be with this session. The Senate really wanted to get a comprehensive transportation bill passed, and we were unable to get that. The House Republicans really wanted to get a significant tax relief bill passed, and they were unable to get that. And the governor really wanted to do something for pre-K 4-year-olds in our public schools. So all 3 of us had a different kind of first priority, and all 3 of us had to kind of dismiss it in order to find some agreement on the rest of the budget and move on. And so I think everybody's probably grumbling a little bit at what the outcome of this is going to be, but I also think it's a pretty strong budget for the state. One of the better health and human service bills that I can remember passed this year. And, providing $525 million for K-12 schools is a lot of money. It's going to allow 2% and 2% on the formula and a bunch of other categorical spending on scholarships and early childhood and other things that are very important to school districts around the state.
So, Senator Hand, first of all, thank you for joining us. Let's begin with the last question that I asked Senator Bach. Are you surprised that this ended up having to go to a special session?
A little surprised. I think as the negotiations went forward, we had bipartisan agreement with the House and the Senate. Republicans, Democrats, at the governor's mansion is where all these discussions took place. So after the fact, when those bills were agreed to and passed, to have the governor kind of come forward and say, oh, wait a minute, there's a bunch of things that are important to me that need to be taken into consideration, so I'm going to veto 3 bills. It kind of raises the question, Governor, where were you during the negotiations? They were in your living room. Why didn't all these things get addressed at that time? So it was a little surprising, frankly, that happened.
Well, to be fair, the governor did say early on that he would veto legislation that did not include pre-K funding. So were you surprised when that veto actually took place?
Well, I was surprised because governors often say things to make a point, and that's what I took it to be, because this was a bill that never got voted in any way, not even in committee in the Senate. And so if it was a priority for the governor, it didn't seem to be a priority for the DFL majority in the Senate. So it's hard to take that when the governor says, this is my number 1 priority, and oh, by the way, didn't get any action in the DFL-controlled Senate. That's why I kind of thought, well, this is rhetorical. It's an issue that the governor feels is important, that he wants to emphasize and elevate. But to take it to the extreme of saying, well, I'm going to veto a bill because something that nobody took a vote on is the reason why I'm going to veto a bill, that just seemed to me to be kind of outrageous and excessive.
Let's talk a little bit about the actual day, the actual special session. Give me some of your insight. What do you expect in terms of flow, and especially given the room that the session will be in?
Well, it'll be a little different. I think it'll take a little while for members to kind of get used to the different environment, but I don't think it'll be extraordinarily difficult to get this work done. We're going to be talking about maybe 2 or 3 bills at the most, probably not have amendments to deal with. I think the voting, we don't have buttons and a screen, so it'll have to be voice voting. But again, I think by the time we come into session, people will know where they're going to vote on these bills, so I think that it should go pretty smoothly. So I'm not looking for or anticipating any major problems with this, just be a little bit different.
And to that point, as Senator Bach said, this is historic to have something not actually in the Senate chamber. Do you kind of feel the same way?
Well, I think it's different, as I said. Maybe historic. I don't know if they've ever, met outside of the Senate chamber or not. I don't think it's a huge deal. The Constitution says we have to meet in St. Paul. We are in St. Paul, so whether we do it here or the History Center or Union Depot or someplace else, to me it doesn't really matter. I don't think that the room that we meet in is as important as just trying to get the bills passed.
Okay, and finally, Senator, I'd like to circle back a little and ask you the same question I asked Senator Bach. What do you say to Minnesotans who wonder why a special session was even needed, considering we went into the session with a $2 billion surplus, roughly $2 billion?
Well, I think, in my opinion, I think the common denominator between this shutdown and the last one we had is Governor Dayton. I think the governor has not been willing to understand or to take advantage of the process by which you have to go through to get agreement. You have to have both give and take. You have to do things that, I guess, make sense to people. And as I said, I think the governor's approach to the bills that we passed in a bipartisan way was a little strange. And I think that caused a lot of people were not expecting it. People thought, we've got agreement on the bills. In fact, the last day of session, when I talked to the speaker, he said that he had been assured by the governor that the only bill he was thinking about vetoing was the K-12 bill. And so when the other two bills got vetoed as well, I think that is a problem. So to me, the biggest issue of why we're in special session has to rest with the governor.